Hi, I'm Kelly Forden. I'm here today with Caroline Kim, and we're going to be discussing her short story, Motherhood, which was first published in Story magazine. And welcome, Caroline.
Thank you so much.
I also loved your book, your short story collection, The Prince of Mournful Thoughts and Other Stories.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for reading it.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it so much. And we chose this story because it's available online, and also Story is offering it, they're making it available online for everybody for 1 month. So try and read it in the month of August.
Yes, thank you so much, Michael Nye.
Yes, he is amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I wanted to first of all, I love the topic of motherhood in general. And I have 4 kids myself.
Oh my God, okay.
Yeah, totally related to so many things right away. I love to see that, those first crazy days where you're alone with the baby. Oh, it's so overwhelming.
It's just like you're just in your own world. Like I just had never experienced anything like that before. I felt really unprepared for it.
Yeah, and everything is, it just feels like you're inhabiting a new country in which you don't speak the language, you don't know anybody, and your body feels like someone else's body. It's so bizarre. And the baby, of course, can't speak to you.
I just found that space so interesting because it was, part of it was so difficult and scary, but then it also seemed filled with possibilities all of a sudden, like possibilities that you just had never considered before. Especially just just the fact of being a parent for the first time, and you just are not prepared for how you're going to feel towards your child and about yourself, and it realigns all of your relationships very suddenly. I remember the first time I watched a movie, and it was parents and a kid, and I found that I was identifying with the parent.
Right. Isn't that the strangest switch? I know.
Yeah. That is okay. Weird. Okay. Yeah. Something happened here.
Exactly. I know I had a friend who performed in a Moth, in the Moth series, and she talked about parenthood, but everybody in the audience were kids. I could totally tell they were in their 20s and 30s, and no one laughed except for me. I was like, but it's like crossing the Rubicon, or,
yes,
you're totally in a different,
Yeah, totally. You can't go back.
You cannot go back. So tell me a little bit about when you started writing this story. I mean, obviously you had some personal experience with motherhood, but then when did it morph into a story, and how did you sort of put it together?
I just really wanted to write a story about motherhood, but I felt like it had already been done a lot, and so I felt like, I just kind of like sat with it for a really long time. And then I realized, like, I think one of my kids at school, they were doing a unit on writing. And so she brought home this thing, and it was that whole thing about like the rising setup and the rising action and, that thing. And I just remember having this reaction like, oh, okay, yes, but why does every story... Right. We just like please, like, at least we need to get over that this is the only story structure. And I realized that was kind of my difficulty with this particular story, is because I was trying to fit it into that kind of mold, and whereas I didn't really feel like there was a conflict.
Right.
I didn't want to like plot it in this way that it was going to be like, it was still important that the character get from one point to another point by the end, but not through the rising action kind of way. And I just felt like with motherhood, the whole experience of it just comes in these little bursts, very unexpected bursts. So I felt it was just more like, I felt more interested in capturing what that felt like, what that experience was like, and how kind of disorienting it was, but not in a completely terrible way, just in a new land kind of way.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone about this, and I can't remember who, but like, instead of there's not a rising action, but there's a tension. There's always tension.
Tension, yeah.
And you do that so well. So you're always sort of on the edge of your seat, although you know these are sort of everyday tensions, but they don't feel every day. So maybe that's part of the way you were able to to capture that. Okay, well, that makes me want to jump right to the rats and how they came into play.
Oh my gosh, those rats. I kept trying to take those rats out.
For some reason they fit so well, and I was trying to figure out, like, why do they fit so well in this story?
I think it just is like her uneasiness. It's like a reflection of her unease that she's feeling. And for a long time, I couldn't figure out why she saw the movie The Birds too. I kept trying to take that out as well.
Right.
And, but I think that's kind of the same thing. That movie is all about unease, really.
Yeah.
And it's very mysterious, and I don't really know what it's about, but it's compelling.
Yeah. And you know what's so interesting is, like, from talking to short story writers on a lot of these episodes, you always think, oh, well, the short story, the writer will be able to tell me exactly why something. But sometimes the best stories, it's just a feeling, like that feeling that the birds evokes is so perfect, and the feeling that the rats evoke. But even though we can't, I don't think it's easy to unpack why.
That's what I like about short stories. I feel like it's closer to poetry in that way. That it's it can be about feelings. It's okay.
Exactly.
Whereas a novel, I can kind of get it. It's like, it's a big commitment. So you've got to kind of really have the scaffolding, and like people got to feel like they know where they are.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so it's a long story. It's 8,600 words. And so I just wanted to briefly ask you about that. Like, did you think about cutting it back? And did you have trouble publishing such a long story? Because I know the gatekeepers like the story shorter.
I did try to make it shorter. I did I tried to cut out those parts, but they just didn't. It was such an integral part. I mean, otherwise it didn't really, her unease didn't really make sense in a way. And then also they would just became important for other reasons too. Like with the rats, the other thing that she realizes is like how vicious she could be for this kid if she needed to.
Right.
Like that's kind of like, she didn't really know that. Like she's like, yeah, I could probably she doesn't know what the limit of that really is, and it's kind of, that's like how it is with the rat, in the end, like she knows it's kind of like shitty.
Right.
But it is like, that's kind of a new reality for her of like who she is, or who that she has to deal with now.
Exactly. Yeah, like she doesn't feel like she's strong enough to do this. It's so interesting. So this brings me, I'm kind of going all over the place here, but all right, I'll say one thing about the POV, and then I'll move on to the question that I was going to ask about Greg and how she feels about herself. But okay, so it's it's close third person. And I think what you were saying about the length, I thought that it kind of had to be that long to chronicle the tedium, just the meandering quality of that time. And it allows the reader, I think, to live with her and to sort of experience it with her. I think if it were shorter, you'd be getting out too early,
That's, that's a really good point. I think that that tedium does have to be experienced. Otherwise you're just being told it and you have to accept it or not.
Exactly. Like, when she says, oh, she was so excited to talk to someone about poop. And by then, like, you get it because you've been with her. And I'm not saying that in the way of saying that it's not at all boring in any way, but you have to just stay with her in the house all that time to get it. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Greg with the two G's. And he is interesting because he also, I feel like so many things are striding the line between menace and being, okay. And he's sort of, I mean, he does check in, but he's also like, a pretty standard white male going to work. And he also has this colonial background. That's a little scary. And But he's learned some things because he will cook and he does that kind of stuff, but he's not around. He's not on location a lot.
Yeah. I find him interesting because he really is trying his best, and I feel like that's actually the case with pretty much everyone in the story. Is they're trying their best. Even that neighbor, Mr. Mason, that moment where he's like talking to Greg and Greg's wearing the Bjorn and Mr. Mason like refuses to look at it, will just only look at Greg's face.
Yeah, I was wondering about that moment too. Like, why won't he look at Greg?
It's like he's actually trying to do Greg a favor. He thinks he's doing Greg a favor.
Okay.
Like he's not going to embarrass him by noting that he's carting his baby on his chest.
Like Greg is being emasculated. And that's so true. That is so true.
Yeah. So everyone's like really actually trying their best, but it's, is it always successful now?
Right. She had moved back from Boston where it was very conservative, very white, it sounded like. And so at least she's returning to some place that she feels more comfortable. But then at the same time, that place still exists where she's not comfortable. So it's not. Yeah. It's actually
California is new to her. So
she I thought she was returning. Sorry. I don't know why.
Yeah, I might have made it seem that way. But so she like the West Coast is new to her.
Okay.
So it is. She's like interested because she knows it's not, as conservative, but at the same time it's that thing where they're so friendly looking, but then you don't know how far that goes. Like everyone in our town kind of looks like really fit and like great, but you just don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I don't know how to get close to people like that,
Well, it's scary when everything's perfect. You're like, okay, how is this possible? So here I made a note. Let's see. There's a little bit about the immigrant experience, but not much. Not as much in this one as in some of your other stories. And this struck me just as a woman, because I'm a white woman, but how happy her parents were for her. And I was thinking I related to this in a way that even, through the 80s, 90s, maybe even today, I don't know, there was feminism, but my parents were super conservative. And they were like, okay with me just getting married and giving up a career. And she's giving up so much in this story. Yeah. She's a lawyer and, you just wonder like, oh, what will happen?
I mean, I feel like that happens all the time.
All the time.
You can see why. Like motherhood is just a really intense experience in itself. Like being a lawyer on top of that, like how is that, how will people do that? Just
exactly.
Yeah, that whole like having it all kind of doesn't work. But in lieu of that, I feel like in our culture, we have this like the whole Real Housewives thing. I feel like that's so popular because that's what people really want. They just want to be so rich. All they do is shop and go out to lunch with their friends.
I know. It's such a hard thing because the world seems stacked against women in that way, because if you just read this story and you realize, okay, look, how could she work on top of this? She's barely surviving. And you can see why, if you had any option at all, you would opt out. But then, obviously there are so many threats here as well. There's the rats and she's waiting to hear from him. And, and there was that scene where he's, she could hear that he'd had a good time and he, had alcohol. And I was thinking like, is that good? What is he doing? I mean, she didn't seem to be threatened by that in the story, but I'm just talking about the vulnerability of women in these situations. And you can see why it happens. And then you can see why we're still vulnerable too.
Yeah. I mean, she's pretty isolated in the story.
Very. Yeah. And without him bringing in money, but her parents are fine with that. And so was that because in your mind, they're like always trying to get to that comfort and she's reached it?
I just imagine like immigrant parents sitting around thinking like what they would want for their child. And ultimately it's like to live a comfortable life where they're free from worry about, political things, but also economically.
Right.
Because of the places they come from. And then that's kind of like being a suburban housewife.
It is.
I mean, that is kind of it's not like, everyone's happy like that. There's people have their struggles, but on a certain level, there's an ease there that's not available to everybody else. They realize like, oh God, being a lawyer, that's still super stressful,
Exactly. Yeah, it's like I always tell my daughter, like it seems great until something goes wrong. And that's where I think, even though, just the presence of the rats and the presence of the birds and things like that, I think maybe that's part of the reason why it worked so well for me. It's like, she is being cushioned, but these things are still there. So then I started trying to figure out how many mentions of these different things or why I was feeling this. So there's 9 mentions of the word blood. So maybe we should talk about blood. Yes. The blood. The blood keeps coming. And the doctor is so dismissive.
Oh, yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, it's on the high end of normal, but
it'll probably be fine.
Yeah, right. You just go home and bleed some more and it'll all work.
Yeah. That's so funny. You know what? That actually, it's so funny because my husband is that way. And in some ways I find that comforting because I find it calming, maybe because I grew up with immigrant parents where everything was a really big deal. So I'm like aware that it's not, but it's kind of like, okay. But honestly, it's so interesting to me that, he does, he's like a white male. So that comes from his experience.
Things work out for that.
That's so crazy. No, reality for me.
It is really creepy, but like, it's weird. I've noticed that, like being a white woman and having been around white men. So let's say like if we unpacked it on the woman level, women know things don't always work out. And then if you're an immigrant woman, it even more. Yeah. But the white males, they've had these things work out for them. And they have this weird, it's like comforting, but you're right. It's super creepy.
Yeah.
Because like, where are you getting that life experience?
it's like, wow, that really does work for you. That's weird.
Yeah, exactly. It's something to note, about the world. But anyway, okay, 158 mentions of the baby.
Oh, the baby.
Yeah. Like 11 of the rats, 23 of Greg, 158 mentions of the baby. And then that's when I was like, oh, wait, I didn't even notice she doesn't have a name. She's just the baby. But I like that. That was on purpose, I'm sure. But
I love, there was like that, there was like that rhythm of the baby was really important to me for some reason. And she felt close to this baby, but it was still the baby, you know what I mean? It was still like kind of distant from her. That's why she had to keep staring at it.
Like, is this real?
Yeah, she was really just fascinated by staring at it. Oh, we didn't talk about the blood though.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Sometimes I do get off track. Let's go back. Okay, back to the blood.
Yeah, I think that was part of like the whole, there's so much people don't tell you about what it's like giving birth really, and what it's like immediately afterward. I was really shocked by that, by both like my doctors and then just my friends. And maybe I didn't have that many friends with kids yet. But I could not believe like how it felt on the body. It was like, whoa, like what was that?
Yes. And you just don't bounce back. You do not bounce back in any way. Yeah.
It was it's like, I find it amazing that people do that. Then you do spring back from that.
Well, and you forget so quickly. I think even I've had 4 kids, but you forget. Like, oh, wait, it was, and then reading this, it brought it all back. Like, oh my gosh, that went on and on and on. And I can't even remember how long it goes on, but it's alarming, really alarming.
Yeah, and it's like your body's not really familiar to you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you're feeding a baby with it. So
Right.
it's like it's very many different things now that are completely new.
And then there's the part where, well, at the end, she ends with the blood, the smell not unpleasant, comforting, really the smell of metal and earth and promise. So tell me a little bit about that, like ending on that.
Yeah, so I just really liked connecting it back to the first time she got her period, because that promises the baby that
Mm-hmm.
she has in the end, which is, you know, despite everything, it's an incredible experience, you know, and she is really, it's all very kind of so many things going on, but it's all to her, it's like moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and she's learning and changing, and that feels like a good thing to her.
Right.
Which is what the sitting, you know, smelling her menstrual blood feels like to her. It's like secret, and it seems like it's maybe should be bad. It's not completely, it's so complicated.
It is so complicated because it is like, it isn't a bad, I mean, not to get too graphic, but like, it's not a bad smell.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is something in that, like viscerally, there's something kind of beautiful about it, but it has been the stigma of it, the isolation that it brings,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the past. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is a, like kind of isolation in women. Also, too, like part of that comes from her lack of community. And I feel like so many women do go through it alone these days.
Yeah, you had that line in the story about that, like how there was community and now there isn't. Exactly. And so it was kind of a great, I don't know if you did this on purpose, but to have her move to an actual new location, you know, and then also be isolated in this new world of the baby. It sort of layered it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that actually did happen to me.
Oh, it did.
And I remember, I was like, it was such an, because I would just meet women through like doing pregnancy yoga and stuff like that.
Or
so
mommy and me or whatever.
Yeah, but so then I only knew pregnant women.
Right. Yeah, and then someone brings a sick baby to the baby group, and then everybody's like, "Oh my God, wait, what are you doing?"
Oh my God, that community, like suddenly, like there's like a community of that too, which she really wishes she felt more a part of, but is also feels kind of distant from also too.
I meant to ask this, and if I did, how many years after? So say you had this experience that stayed with you. How many years after that did you start trying to draft this story?
I think it was a while. I think probably my oldest was 7 or so.
Okay.
And then the whole story took me, I think, at least 3 years to write. Wow. Like I would write a section of it, and then I would just kind of hit a wall, and then I put it away. And then for some reason I did keep wanting to return to it though. Mm-hmm. So I think like every so often I just kind of added more and more. And then, you know, it's like after a certain point in a story and how it starts to roll downhill. Mm-hmm. So finally that happened, but then I still wasn't sure what it was really. So I had to put it away for a long time till I could see it again.
And when you got it back out, what made you realize that it was finished for you?
I like forget really quickly the stuff I write. So it did have this feel of like I was kind of reading something new. And I felt like I had changed by the end. I felt a little bit changed by the end, like having gone through this with her.
Okay.
And so I was like, yeah, that's pretty much what I was going for. Yeah.
And in what way changed it?
I felt like I had started with just she's in this state of somebody pointed out to me that it starts with this like her sense of hearing first, and then it ends with her sense of smell. Mm-hmm. And so she's just in this state of like taking in a lot of input, but not really fully being able to understand. But like through the process, she does start to make some connections so that she's trying to like search for meaning in what she's experiencing.
Right.
I feel like she gets to some point of like, okay, whoosh, that this is how I ended up with my baby.
Right. She comes to that realization of like why the birds came back to her and what was happening with her parents at the time that she was there as well. Obviously, they end up back together because it says they were just separated for like 6 months. Is that right? Or half a year. But then I was thinking about how those are such crucial ages. I had a friend whose parents separated in middle school briefly and then got back together, but it was like as traumatic as a divorce. I mean, he never really didn't get over it. I don't know. Is it that age? I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think that does have a lot to do with that age. It's like you're making your forays out into the world and kind of trying to see what you think about things. And then when your home life is suddenly so uncertain, it's really hard to like have a base from which to know who you are, what you like, what you don't like.
Exactly. Well, and she also does. So this was interesting. I have no idea why I started checking how many times she said herself. But then I noticed that she says 17 mentions of herself. And it was, she told herself, found herself. She can hear herself, adjusted herself, hear herself again, feel herself, pour herself, see herself, only herself.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
Wow. That is so, she is her best friend,
Right.
Ultimately, the reason that she is going to be okay is because she has herself.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. She scoops up the rat. I mean, he puts out the traps, but who has to clean up the rat? Okay. Tell me, that leads me into, she sees the rat and the rat may or may not have been pregnant, or at least looks, and there's blood there too.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, it's like she's aware that like this is a creature just like she is, and who's to say like, who has more value. But at the same time, she's like, you are not getting anywhere near my kid. And
right.
You bring your family here, so I have to kill you.
Right. And I'm going to do it.
Yes, I'm going to do it. Right. Sorry, but I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
And if another one of you shows up, I'm going to do it again.
I know. Yeah. So so by the end, not only is I think she realizes that she's her own best friend, it seems like. And then she realizes she's strong and she's okay without Greg kind of too. I mean, he's providing a little bit, but she can scoop up the rat if he's not around.
Yeah. I think she that's a acceptance of her maybe of her own strength, and then also her own maybe a part that she doesn't quite really like about herself to realization, and having to accept that.
Like what part that she doesn't like about herself?
Like, that she would just kill this rat in this really horrible way. I'm sure there are other things, they could try, or they could, but no.
Right. She knows she's fiercely protective. Okay. So sort of toward the beginning of the story, she says she felt distant from everything she cared about before, even Greg. She felt sorry for him because he didn't know this and she couldn't explain it. It was simply that from now on, everything important would happen inside of her.
Yeah. It's kind of, I think she realizes that she thought she was would share this experience with Greg, and then she quickly realizes oh man, no, it's going the other way.
It's all me.
It's even more she's I don't even know how to explain any of this stuff that has now changed me profoundly. Right. And I'm now a different person, but you have no way of knowing that. And it is a little bit of a setup. Actually, I'm going to write another story with these two characters much later on in their lives.
Awesome. Oh my gosh, good. I was just thinking I want to know what happens. So you're working on it now?
Actually, I'm working on this novel right now, but I've started it and then I just take notes every so often. Yeah, I feel like this story is it does kind of leave it. It's like a little bit of a resting kind of ending. Yeah, I
Right.
didn't feel like it was quite finished yet.
Oh, cool. So I won't ask you. I mean, I'm dying to ask you what happens to the two of them, but I guess we'll wait. Stay tuned. Stay tuned. I already kind of talked about this, but Allie had seen how nervous Greg was around the traps, especially when he released one by accident, almost catching his thumb. And we talked about this. Her husband was like other men of their generation. He did not have the same macho Marlboro man view of manhood as his father's generation, the sense that some jobs were men's jobs and others women.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, we did talk about that, but I feel like that's such a great advancement. And yet it's still a choice, right?
Yeah. I was thinking about how my oldest is 18, and she doesn't have any experience of that. I feel like, I'm kind of the last generation. What are they called? The best generation?
Oh, yeah, the greatest generation.
Greatest generation. And then to a certain extent, the baby boomers too, a little bit. There was this like this is what men do. You open a door for women and you do this. Right. But then you're also like, squeeze her butt as she goes by.
Or like raid her as she walks by, which is
it's like
this is a thing.
This weird mix of like,
it is. It's terrible. I mean, good and bad. You're right.
Exactly. It's complicated. It feels complicated to be a woman in that way. It's like, right. Hey, it's really nice if your husband wants to be the one to step up and kill all the rats. That would be nice.
Right.
At the same time, you realize like, that comes with a lot of other stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, would you rather kill your own rats and have your own 401k or whatever?
Right. Yeah. And so he's like, I feel like, he's kind of in that too, it's just kind of where the culture is at, people trying to figure it out and
right.
Kind of showing the weaknesses.
I guess that's the thing I love about short stories or fiction writing in general. It's not for us to solve it, right? It's just, that's what you see. Yeah. It's out there. So where does this, like, in terms of all your other stories in the book and everything, where does this fall in the continuum? And tell me a little bit about like how you started writing short stories really quickly.
Okay. I actually started out in poetry. I got my MFA in poetry years and years ago in the mid-90s. And then, but while I was there, I realized I think I'm really a fiction writer, maybe. So a few years after that, I did a program at the University of Texas in Austin through the Michener Center. But honestly, then for like 20 years, I just didn't really feel like there was a place for my stories at that time. So I kind of quit writing, but I just continued to write without, on my own.
Yeah.
Without people
journaling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was still kept trying to figure things out. And I what happened was got really stuck. And I realized the reason I was stuck in my writing was because I was kind of stuck in my understanding my own identity as a Korean American. So that led me to just figuring out like, wait, what does that even mean? And then like, if I were in Korea, what kind of person would I be? What would I know? So I just started to research that. And that led me to writing just different kinds of stories. And I just continued just writing these. And then I just popped my head up at some point because I felt like, it's kind of like she feels like that whole housewife thing where she's like, this is the American dream, but actually it's such a waste. There's like so many women, smart women who have so much to give, who do really go to, amazing schools, accomplish amazing things. And then, they just kind of never pick that back up again.
Right.
And it does feel like a waste to some degree, and I kind of felt that way in my case. I was like, gosh, I went to all these like, I like people had faith in me and, I should just give it another try. And so by that point, I kind of looked back and during that time I had written enough stories for a collection. So I just started sending them out.
Wow. So you wrote them all before you even started sending them out? Like most of them?
Yeah. Like,
okay.
Except maybe 2.
Wow. That takes a lot of patience and I don't know, because you know how you always want, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. I'm having a mind block, but it's like you want that validation, or it's hard to resist the validation thing. But sometimes that's so important, because it sounded like you were trying to hear your own voice. And then you start getting those rejections from literary magazines. And I feel like that's detrimental to that whole journey, maybe.
It really is. And that's why I would step back from it for so long. I mean, the thing that really saved me is I had a writing group the whole time. I was part of this Asian American writers group. And we've been together now for over 20 years.
Wow.
And so there were years when I didn't produce anything, but just attending and kind of like being a part of it still kept me in it to some degree. And then when I did have work, I had people to show it to. And of course that, like, you need at least one reader, serious reader, at least. Otherwise, there's no oxygen, to really keep you going.
Right. So, and they were good, like, in terms of if you didn't have anything for a few sessions, you could just go read their work. And
yeah, it was really interesting because we all kind of like, we've all of us, it's only been in the past like 5 years or so that we've started to publish our books.
Wow.
So we were just on a very similar kind of journey too, like also with having kids around that time, and there's just so much going on.
Right. Well, that is so inspiring. Well, I don't want to take up, I said 45 minutes and we're right at 45 minutes, but I always ask the last question, which is there anything vital that I did not bring up that you thought for sure we'd talk about or you wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I'm amazed. Like, I love that you counted. Although
well, I was trying to get to how is this working so well, and like, why is this so creepy, and why are all of these disparate elements working? So it came down to
like other people, really good readers like yourself, are the ones that explain the stories really to the writer. Because you do things, and like somebody else pointed out to me that like her daughter, the baby's name is Jennifer with a G.
Yes. I wanted to bring that up. I did want to bring that up because it's Greg with 2 G's. And Jennifer.
Yes, somebody was like, Greg has 2 G's, and I was like, oh my God, that did not occur to me.
That is so interesting. Oh my God.
That was not on purpose. I don't know like why. I mean, I don't even know where the name Greg with 2 G's came from. I like literally happened to write that down and was like, yeah, that's him.
Right. It's like they have these American sounding names, right? Yeah. But there's something a little off too. So I think that is so cool. It's such a good way to articulate the strangeness of everything. So of motherhood and whatever. But anyway, thank you so much, Caroline. It was really great talking to you.
This was so fun.
It was really fun.